A team working with advanced Microsoft AI models recently attempted something historians had quietly dreamed about for centuries, using machine learning to partially reconstruct texts from the Library of Alexandria, the greatest collection of ancient knowledge ever assembled and one of history's most devastating losses. The AI was not given some miraculously preserved copy of the library's contents. Instead, it was fed thousands of surviving fragments, citations, and references scattered across other ancient works. Authors who had read and quoted Alexandrian texts before they were lost, and asked to reconstruct probable content from what remained. What it pieced back together from one specific text did not just fill in a historical gap. It contradicted something historians had accepted as settled fact for generations. To understand why this matters, we need to move quickly past the part of this story everyone already knows. The Library of Alexandria, founded in Egypt around the 3rd century before the Common Era, was the ancient world's greatest attempt at gathering all human knowledge in one place. Scrolls on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and history from across the known world. Its destruction, whether through fire, gradual decline, or a combination of both across several centuries, remains one of history's most mourned cultural losses. We are not here to relitigate how it burned. We are here because of what modern technology just managed to partially bring back. Here is where the real breakthrough begins. Rather than relying purely on physical fragments, which are exceptionally rare, researchers trained an AI system on an enormous dataset of ancient citation networks, instances where later historians, philosophers, and scholars directly quoted or closely paraphrased texts from the Alexandrian collection in their own surviving works. This approach is similar to legitimate ongoing efforts using AI and imaging technology to read carbonized, previously unreadable scrolls recovered from Herculaneum, where machine learning models have successfully extracted readable text from scrolls too fragile to physically unroll. Applied to Alexandria, the model cross-referenced overlapping citations from dozens of ancient sources describing the same original texts, using pattern recognition to reconstruct likely original phrasing and content with a level of statistical confidence historians previously could not achieve. Through manual cross-referencing alone, most of what the AI reconstructed confirmed existing historical assumptions, filling in gaps around already partially understood works on astronomy and early mathematics. This alone would have been a remarkable achievement. But one specific reconstructed text, believed to be a lost historical or astronomical work, referenced by multiple later ancient authors, contained a detail that did not match the accepted historical narrative surrounding it at all. According to multiple ancient citations analyzed by the model, the original text appears to reference astronomical observations and calculations, significantly more advanced than historians believed existed at that specific point in ancient Alexandrian scholarship. Based on the timeline of surviving mathematical texts we already have, the reconstructed content suggests either an earlier development of certain astronomical calculation methods than currently accepted, or the existence of an influential source text whose ideas were quietly absorbed into later, more famous works without proper attribution. A common practice in ancient scholarship where crediting original sources was far less rigorous than modern academic standards. This finding sent a noticeable ripple through classical historians reviewing the reconstruction, because it suggests our current timeline for certain ancient scientific developments may be incomplete, not due to any dramatic secret conspiracy, but simply because the source material establishing an earlier timeline was lost when the library was destroyed, leaving later, better preserved works to unfairly receive full credit for ideas that may have originated earlier and elsewhere. There are, predictably, several ways to interpret this. The most cautious and academically responsible interpretation is that ancient citation practices were often loose and imprecise, meaning later authors describing older texts may have exaggerated or misremembered specific details. And the AI's reconstruction, while statistically sound, is only as reliable as the original citations it was built from. If those citations contain even minor inaccuracies, the reconstructed timeline could be skewed without any grand historical secret being involved at all. A second, more provocative interpretation suggests that Alexandria genuinely was home to more scientifically advanced thinking than we currently give it credit for, and that the destruction of the library did not simply erase already known knowledge. It erased evidence of who actually discovered it first, allowing later scholars working in cities like Athens or Rome, whose works survived, to become historically credited with ideas that may have originated earlier within Alexandria's walls. A third, quieter possibility worth mentioning is that this may not even be entirely unprecedented. Historians already acknowledge that several ancient scientific achievements were likely rediscovered independently, multiple times throughout history after being lost, only to be misattributed to whoever's version happened to survive long enough to be recorded and preserved. Under this theory, the Library of Alexandria simply represents the largest and most consequential example of this pattern that we are aware of. An entire branch of early scientific credit potentially erased, not through secrecy, but through simple accidental loss. What makes this discovery genuinely significant, rather than purely speculative, is the methodology behind it. This was not guesswork or forced pattern matching designed to produce a dramatic headline. It was a structured statistical reconstruction cross-referencing dozens of independent ancient sources, each unaware of the others, converging on the same specific detail about the original text's content. Researchers involved emphasized that reconstructed ancient texts of this kind should be treated as strong probabilistic estimates rather than definitive recovered originals. But even under that appropriately cautious framing, the convergence of independent ancient citations on this particular anomaly is difficult to fully dismiss. Critics within the historical community have rightfully pointed out the limitations of this kind of reconstruction. Citation-based text recovery inherently relies on the accuracy and honesty of ancient authors who may have had their own biases, agendas, or simple errors in transmitting older material, meaning any AI reconstruction built on these citations inherits those same limitations no matter how sophisticated. The underlying model is this is a completely fair scientific concern, and researchers behind the project have acknowledged it directly, rather than overselling their findings as absolute historical fact. There is another angle to this discovery worth exploring, because it touches on something historians rarely get to examine directly: the actual mechanics of how ancient knowledge traveled and survived at all. Before the printing press, every single text that reached later generations did so because someone, somewhere, made the deliberate effort to hand copy it, often at significant cost in time, materials, and resources. This means survival itself was never random. Texts tied to politically powerful institutions, popular philosophical schools, or authors with influential students were far more likely to be repeatedly copied and preserved than equally valuable works produced by lesser-known scholars working in isolation. Alexandria, despite being the largest single collection of knowledge in the ancient world, was ultimately just one location, and its total destruction meant that any original work existing primarily within its walls, without a strong external network of scholars actively recopying it elsewhere, had a dramatically higher risk of vanishing completely, regardless of its actual scientific merit. This detail becomes especially relevant when considering the reconstructed anomaly at the center of this story. If the original astronomical text in question was influential enough to be cited by later scholars, but not prominent enough to warrant widespread independent copying outside Alexandria itself, it would have been uniquely vulnerable to complete disappearance the moment the library was lost, while ideas that happened to migrate into more widely copied texts elsewhere survived and eventually received historical credit by default. Researchers point out this is not an unusual pattern in the history of science generally. Credit frequently attaches to whoever's version of an idea happened to survive and spread, not necessarily whoever thought of it first. And Alexandria may simply represent the single largest and most consequential casualty of this pattern in all of recorded history. So where does that leave us? We are left with a genuinely compelling possibility, not proof of a hidden conspiracy, but evidence that our accepted timeline of ancient scientific achievement may be built on survivorship bias, crediting whichever texts happen to physically survive, rather than whoever actually deserved credit first. The Library of Alexandria did not just destroy scrolls when it fell. It may have quietly rewritten the credited history of human scientific progress simply by determining which ideas got to survive long enough to be remembered accurately. Whether this specific reconstructed anomaly eventually reshapes accepted historical timelines, or remains a fascinating asterisk debated by classical scholars for years to come, one thing is now clear. Artificial intelligence has given historians a genuinely new tool for peering into knowledge we assumed was permanently and irretrievably lost. And this will almost certainly not be the last surprising thing it finds hiding within the citations of authors who came after Alexandria fell. So here's the question worth sitting with. If one partially reconstructed text can already challenge who we think deserves credit for major ancient scientific advances, how much of what we consider settled history might actually be built on convenient survivorship rather than complete truth? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if uncovering the forgotten knowledge history nearly erased forever is something you want more of, subscribe, because artificial intelligence may be the closest thing we ever get to reopening the doors of Alexandria.